Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, the one, the only, Seth, and Mike.
And the one and only Mike. Good morning.
For those of you who are watching live on YouTube, Michael has got a new hat on. It is a good day today.
Oh, yeah.
There has been an announcement from Microsoft. There's the Microsoft, I guess it was the June update, just came out, apparently. Is that right, Tommy?
June, yeah. So we talked about a little on Tuesday where it was out in the morning, but we didn't know all the features.
The blog wasn't out yet. It was just kind of like desktop was released, the blog was incoming, and it wasn't there yet.
Exactly. And now we have the entire blog post with all the feature updates. It's pretty amazing.
So thankfully, there's more on-object updates because that's going to be forever fixing an issue and getting that a little more streamlined. But there is a brand new visual this month. Yay!
There is.
Brand new visual. So there is a new card visual, which, frankly, this one's been long coming. I think this is a great idea. It allows you to make multiple cards all at once.
Yeah. If this is just a taste of what's to come,
yes,
I like it. I like it.
I like it.
I like
better.
The nice thing that it outlines is how many objects and things you'd have to build in order to make it happen, and why they're making the change, and then some of the inbuilt properties and features that just auto work. So yeah,
I already have some customers I'm thinking of that today, like right now, I'm like, this could replace like tons of things or objects on a page that all becomes one single. And that's the point. It's now one visual. It renders one visual. It gets all the data at once, renders the vision completely as one object. Doesn't fire a bunch of queries. So I think it's a great idea. I like the performance improvement that we're going to get from this. So the one I'm most excited about, and the reason why I'm wearing this hat that you can see online or not online, we now have a PBIP, Power BI hat. And for the first time ever, I mean, usually I wear these things and people have no clue what it is. It's like OBX, right? Those little stickers you put on the back of your car. It's these stickers like, well, there's a sticker in someone's car. And I'm like, it's like, what is it? Half marathon. They do like, there's a little sticker that would be on someone's car for the half marathon. I don't know what the number is for half marathon, 14.5 or something like that. Some crazy amount of miles people run.
You're not an endurance runner?
I'm not. Me. Surprise. Shocker.
Shocker.
Okay. I'm not an endurance runner. My little mini legs and my little squatty body is not going to be able to run marathons. So, I mean, I could, but I choose not to.
It's not your thing.
Not my thing. But that being said, though, the Power BI desktop developer mode is out. And if I had a little soundbite, I would put on a little yay. Like this has been long coming, very much cheering for this feature to come out.
So right out of the gate, which we haven't talked about, is it a PBIP file or is it a PBIP?
PBIP. PBIP.
Well,
PBIP, right?
PBIP. It's got to end a P, right?
It's got a PBIP BIP.
Technically, you don't need the PBIP. If you actually just need what is the PBEIR? You can actually delete the PBIP because that's just kind of a project.
No, it's the project file. It's the container, isn't it?
No, it's not the container.
It's just a pointer. It's a series of pointers that point to the things.
Yep. So contrary to PBIX, they're isolated. So you don't actually need. All you need is the definition.pbir.
Tommy's reading the actual blog on it.
Yeah. So the definition.pbir will also open up the report. Not just the PBIP. So
don't try to downgrade the value of PBIP, Tommy.
I mean, I love it too, but you don't need it.
That's not true. You need it. You know what's interesting? Okay, so for those of our listeners who weren't listening to us, a couple episodes ago, we're talking about
which everyone should be listening to all the episodes. Just saying.
The new. I find this interesting, and Tommy, I'm surprised you didn't jump onto this, but like it's the Power BI desktop developer mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's like hardcore mode
for desktop users
for a long time. Yeah, give us the hardcore mode,
excluding Mac since 2015.
Give me an actual button that says hardcore.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That we don't even have integrated with our system yet. We have to use 2 other applications to
I've stopped building reports in desktop. I just now write it all straight with code. I just write the code that I need now. Yep. I don't even use desktop.
I know you use DAX generator, my friend, and that is desktop.
So this new mode gives us the ability to basically have source control, CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery.
Yep.
Looks like text editor support, programmatic generation and editing of artifact definitions, yada yada. We just hit the gold mine as it relates to actual report development. So one of the this file, it's local, right? And then you can hook up a workspace in Fabric to be at the end of a branch, right? So as you're connecting Git or VS Code and creating the project, you can essentially have multiple people working on the same file. You can validate code before it gets deployed to certain locations. And this is the big win, right, gents? Anything else you would add to that?
I think this is just in desktop mode. You're really focusing on like a report and a data model. But if you think about this and extend this idea or concept into a workspace where we have multiple models, multiple reports, and basically pointers to the various objects there. I mean, this is basically this is what you're going to get when you use the Git integration inside a workspace. A very, very similar formatting of things. But I'm very much thrilled with this one. You can just open this stuff up in VS Code, check it into a Git repo. It's very helpful.
Yet there's 2 things right now that I was a little disappointed with is one, no Tyndall. It's still all JSON right now. It's coming, but it's not. I was hoping that the timing of it would be when they release GitHub.
Tommy,
what?
They are like a very large boat.
I understand.
Tyndall just came out like 6 months ago. It's like they need at least 3.5 years to integrate it into the new thing.
Demo it because it would make perfect sense. Because
that's true.
We talked about when the Tyndall announcement came was it's really hard to edit JSON files. I don't think you're getting a lot of people who are going to go into the code right now as is and actually, in a sense, really in production or in a true situation, be just editing a JSON file. The other thing I'm a little disappointed with is there's one folder. So if I have all of my reports and data sets in a workspace, I can't organize it within the repo. So they all have to live basically in the same level, just like a normal workspace. So you can't in your repo have like subfolders.
So here's the question that came up in my mind today.
Wait, well, hold on. Before we go to your question, hang on to your question, Seth. I want to answer Tommy's question. I believe, Tommy, there is no requirement for that. I think you could modify the way the PBIP file is working to automatically add subfolders as needed. Are you talking about GitHub in the workspace? Or are you talking about PBI desktop?
How it's actually going to go pushed into the workspace. So basically, you can have the subfolders, but it won't recognize it in.
I see what you're saying. So you can reorganize it, but the works when you publish it, it won't be happy.
Yeah. So that project name, the files and folders that represent the report, let me see if I can find the actual text on it. So multiple reports and data sets at the same folder.
Yes.
So you basically have to save every PBIP, which creates 2 folders, in the same level per workspace. If you have anything in a nested folder, it won't actually get pushed to the workspace.
Well, here's the question. My question relates to this conversation.
Okay.
What strikes me is the Fabric workspace just an endpoint for a branch that I can deploy to? Or is it where I have to store everything? And the reason I ask that question is like, do I really need Fabric to use this?
You need Fabric to use it.
Why?
No, it works in anything premium right now.
Everything that
but hold on. If this is a PBIP, and all I have to do is create a Visual Studio code Git repository that recognizes what that file is. What is preventing me from ingesting that file, modifying it, and writing it back to a shared folder location called local?
Yeah, there's like a compiler basically taking the pbib and just compiling it down.
So the only problem, I mean, you could, but it's not going to get pushed to the workspace. Notice the document, the wording.
You're right.
Friend.
You're right. There would be no ability to like verify it in the service. I get it.
Notice the wording when anytime they say Git, there's always a preceding word. They're calling it fabric Git.
Well, okay. Yes, but to your point though, Seth, this thing should be very standard to compile. And I'm looking at, what's coming out from PBI tools. I'd have to imagine there's going to be other tool engines like Tabular Editor and PBI tools that will let you run as code, basically, right? Check in these files, because you can't check in the file. My understanding is right now is if you're using this desktop developer mode, you can't check in those files to PowerBI.com right now. You can connect your PowerBI.com environment to Git itself, but there is, I have to double check the features in this one, but you should be able to link your workspace to GitHub. I'm not sure how you check in desktop files, and can you just literally lift the entire files section into an entire workspace? I'm not sure that works from your desktop. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Like you have Power BI desktop mode on your desktop, you save the things as a PBIP project. The project doesn't necessarily get lifted directly into the service. I think I get it. You might be able to like programmatically use a tool like TE or PBI tools to compile it, make a PBIX, and then using the APIs, then publish the PBIX into the service. It'll be interesting to see where this goes.
It looks like you can actually create the Git integration in non-fabric. I just don't know what that does.
Okay, so bear with me, just because it peeved me that all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? I have to use this with Fabric?
Mm-hmm.
Don't we already have a connection mode between SharePoint and Power BI that just picks up the changes of a file?
Yes, correct. You have that.
Can't I point a Git project to deploy changes into that SharePoint file location, thereby just automatically updating?
Yep, you can do that.
So then I could have a test workspace that would be tied to a particular SharePoint location.
Yep, upload these files.
Have a prod one.
When checking the main.
And I could do this with
kick off a build.
Going directly to Fabric.
Yes. You can skip the whole Fabric piece of that.
Until they listen to this and shut it down.
Until they listen to it and shut it down. Yeah. We've hacked the system in 5 minutes, and they're going to now shut it down. I did like the blog post directly from, Christian Wade was going out and kind of talking about Zoe was talking about the section of their video that they did for Microsoft Build. They didn't go through and they gave you a very clear definition. Let's take a definition look at what's inside the root folder. And they start talking about the data set, the report, what is the git ignore file for, what is the project name.pbip file for. Like it shows you like more of what's inside the file. So it kind of gives you a bit more of a structure around what you're doing to build this. This does eliminate the need for having, if you have multiple thin reports and one data model, this does eliminate the need to be able to use PBI split tools, right? So this allows you to aptly change between multiple thin reports in the same project.
It's true.
Because if you think about like a project, right? If you think about a data set and 3 or 4 or 5 thin reports, you're using the same data set in all cases of the reports. So what you want to be doing is you want to be pointing to, okay, I'm going to work on the sales report with this data model. You can just open it up, boom, it just works. And then you can change the PBIP file or make a copy of the PBIP file and open up a different PBIP file, which would then reopen the model with a different report. So I can use stocks and the same data model. So it will make this, I think, easier to switch between different thin reports as you build them. The challenge becomes, in this case, you don't have a separate desktop window for the model and one for the report. It's still just all one desktop open file. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's going to need to be some diagrams on this one.
We need some more developer mode.
And you can't test it out in a non-fabric workspace because I was just like, oh, maybe I can use one of my existing workspaces and just push everything to another, like an Azure Git repo. But my entire tenant's fabric right now. So I still think this is still a fabric only, no matter what you do.
Well, let me step back here for a second. The PBIP is a way of desktop decomposing a file, a PBIX file, into multiple little smaller files. I don't think this has the same connection to what a Git integration looks like in a workspace. You don't use the same thing.
I mean,
when you connect a workspace to Git and then synchronize your files, the structure is different.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you're supposed to use desktop developer mode directly with Git, directly synced with a GitHub repo inside a workspace. So I think right now the pattern is PBIP is you can check in the code. The idea is you check out the code, open it up in desktop, do your development, check in the code, and then you publish from desktop back into the service. So I don't think right now there's a seamless integration between the PBIP file folder structure and the service GitHub integration.
That's true.
Because I don't see anything talking about, just synchronize everything that way. But they do have Git integration at the workspace level. And I do know I've tested, you can use the Git integration with a Fabric workspace. So if you have a workspace in Fabric and you have a Power BI Pro workspace, Power BI Premium workspace, it could be any one of the flavors of Premium per user, Premium Azure, embedded P1, all the other premiums seem to work with the Git integration. They will allow you to synchronize your workspace with a Git repo. The only one I found that does not work is a Pro workspace. So any workspace is made for just Pro users, the Git integration will literally fail and say, no, you can't do this. This is not a feature of Pro. So
sweet.
Yeah. So Kevin's confirming here. So Kevin says, hey, I did this for a client yesterday that does not use Fabric. They did the Git integration on a premium per user. So right now, premium per user does allow you to do Git. Yeah. Yeah. And then Donald, you're confirming kind of what I said here. When you're using the PBIP project, right? Save PBIP as a PBIX and then publish the PBIX, or, just open the PBIP and publish directly from desktop, which gets you to that next level. This is, Seth, you said this yesterday, or maybe we were talking about this offline. We were talking about Fabric has just come into the Power BI ecosystem and just thrown a ton of IT features at business users all at once. Just a ton. Like this whole Git thing, no business user understands what Git is. They're not thinking this way, right?
This is true. This is probably why they call it Power BI desktop developer mode. But what does that mean for a workspace that's integrated with Git? Like, I suppose your hardcore developers would only be the ones driving those workspaces across the ecosystem.
Okay.
So it still makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense, but I'm just saying, like, if when these features are still existing to normal business users, they're going to see these things called Git and they're like, well, I don't even know what that is.
They're going to go code. Oh my gosh, what is this? A repository? No.
Yeah.
How about publish? That sounds good.
Exactly right. Yeah. Oh, Greg, you're funny. Once again, in Power BI, Pro means undeserving features actual professionals need to use and need. Yes.
It's funny.
Anyways,
either way, happy to have it.
Yeah, I think this is a great ad. I'm looking forward to playing with it. I will note that if you're going to use the Power BI developer mode, you need to turn it on in your preview features. So there's a setting inside your preview features. You need to turn it on. When you turn on the developer mode, you can now save your Power BI files as a PBIP folder structure, and then it will save your project. So,
and you also have to, so both things we talked about as openers, the visual you have to turn on as well. It's a preview feature.
The visual is actually on by default.
Yeah. It's not.
Well, it is. So the new visual, you just download desktop, that preview feature comes on by default. But you could turn it off if you don't like it, which you'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't talk about that more. That was such a bombshell. Obviously, we're all the nerdy tech guys, so we had to talk about Git. But this card, and because this is like the first core visual I think that they're really releasing. And that's what I've been seeing, that this is the first of many enhancements that they're doing. Part of what I believe is Miguel Myers, right?
Yeah, Miguel Myers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is all part of that core visual
PBI core visuals, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So as cool as Git is, and I just tested this on a non-Fabric workspace. If you connect an existing workspace to Git that you didn't do anything in Power BI Desktop, it does extract the full each data set and report into 2 folders. No PBIP file.
See, that's the difference there. So
but as the PBIR.
So what is the PBIR then?
So the PBIP is a full, like a project-based thing. So
correct.
PBIR can also open up Power BI Desktop.
That's just the report.
Right, connected to, but the PBIP is really not what we're not used to, where it's like the interconnected. So you don't need a PBIP.
Interesting. I'll have to think about that more. I haven't played with the PBIR files. Oh, stupid! Now I need to make another hat.
I was trying to save you from that. That was my only pushback on PBIP. Don't do it, Tommy.
Oh man, now we need another hat. So all the PBIs.
There's a good question I want to talk about.
Okay,
came up in the chat.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
From Alex, he asks, has it been too many features all at once? I don't think you get away from that from the standpoint that if you're relaunching how you do analytics, right? Like there's just a lot to consume, which is obviously why we're talking about a lot of changes. Mm-hmm. But I do find it an interesting question because it depends on what is the purpose of the question. Is it too much for us as technologists? No. And I think the feedback in the chat is like, bring it on. We'll figure it out. We'll sort out this new ecosystem. We'll see how it pans and plays and how we integrate into our systems. But if the intent is that you just threw a whole bunch of features, or we now have a singular analytics package that business users are supposed to leverage, is it too much?
I don't know. I don't think, honestly, in this scenario, I don't think you can get away from all the feature releasing that's occurring right now, because there's a huge fundamental shift that just happened. Mm-hmm. And I think that main shift in technology stack has enabled so many more use cases. Now, granted, I mean, this is something that they've probably been working on, years, right? Someone behind the scenes has been trying to figure out how to move things over to Delta tables for months. So
ease of use experience. Sure.
Yeah. So I think, my guess here is typically when we see features being built, and if you think about Microsoft's development cycles, there's a handful of things that are quick wins, right? Hey, and then there's these longer pull movement items that are just more massive in nature to just reshift or retool or redesign a lot of the core code. Mm-hmm. And to get to those major milestones, it's a longer development cycle. You need more people on it. And it kind of felt like the beginning before build was a lot of skinny features were coming out. We're this is just, we're kind of just fixing bugs, making things a bit more solid. And then build comes and we get all these new features and everything changes and our whole ecosystem's different now. But that's because they've been building this for a year, 2 years, or however long it's been.
Mm-hmm. Tommy, what are your thoughts?
But at the same time, yes, we've been so used to major updates being, in a sense, the same journey or the same path of what we normally do. Oh, wow, there's drill through, or look what they're doing for the enterprise. This makes sense. It's been on the same journey of I'm a business analyst or I'm a report developer, and I'm just expanding that. What they're doing now with Git, which I would probably say the majority of Power BI developers, they're probably not in Git, or they wouldn't have a reason to, right? You may naturally find yourself learning about it with the different repos and PowerShell and Python's packages because there's some code, but by no means up until now have you ever needed to know what Git was to be successful at Power BI. And then everything now with Fabric, this is not just the growth story or the growing up story. This is literally shaking all the dice or all the marbles of the skills and what path you're going to be, and just shaking it around right now and kind of is dizzying. So it's not just, oh, look at this new feature in Power BI desktop and another way to share. It's literally expanded and blurred the lines of other personas, other professionals, and where do they stand? I think that's the hardest part here.
I find it good.
I was gonna say, I like Alex's second comment there, talking about, organizations are slow moving, right? This is a lot of new stuff all at once. And thinking about this, these new features that we're introducing, it's going to take years, maybe a year, maybe months, long months or years of time for organizations to really wrap their head around what just occurred and be able to integrate it into their actual workflows, because we're in the mix. We understand the problems. We've already been professional developers. But for now, a new user showing up to Power BI for the first time, or organizations who already have a wider range of skills around Power BI today, yeah, they need these features. They're very relevant. But now there's a whole layer of education that needs to be applied into the Power BI ecosystem that we've never really had to deal with before. We've been building reports, working in modeling, and that's about it. But now we've got these two other new personas around data engineering and data scientists, pipelines, this whole data warehouse and lakehouse management system. What does all that do? And so now organizations need to figure out, where does this new ecosystem fit inside their existing infrastructure? None of these changes are none of the challenges these problems are solving. I would say that right. None of the challenges the organizations have around version control are different. This is the same stuff that every organization has struggled with for everything they've ever built, right? We're now just incorporating a lot more of the stuff closer and easier to use for the Power BI user. Anyways,
so you say that, but for the developer, yes. My concern is that when we look at the tooling pre-Fabric, what was the ecosystem? It's Power BI.
Yeah.
Right. The business interaction and the virality of a dynamic tool that is allowing business people to get an insane amount of value out of data, from collecting data from multiple systems, doing their own thing, doing their own transformations, doing their own reports, which creates problems for BI and enterprise, whatever, but it solves a ton of problems.
Mm-hmm.
The day before, I think my problem is this. The day before build, it was Power BI, and the day after, everything was just renamed Fabric, right?
Yeah.
Where was the transition for business users who tried to go find Power BI community, and it's Fabric now, and now everything's Fabric? And already I've had conversations where people are like, where's all the Power BI stuff? Where did it go? Because that was my world. And it's fantastic that hey, not only are we taking that world, that is just part of this amazing ecosystem that we're now enabling you to use. That's the other part I would have loved to see more of, which is what we're talking about, which is that transition from, hey, business user or people who are going to make this a viral thing within an organization and drive Fabric, this Fabric ecosystem, instead of just Power BI, here's all the other options. This is how your world just exploded into a million possibilities.
Yes.
And scaling and solving your problems.
Yes.
And I would have loved to have seen more of that come out with the announcement of new tech. And I think Microsoft repetitively does this poorly from a marketing standpoint of big transitions of this and bringing people along for the ride. Because if you think about subscriptions and subscription service, did you just ostracize all of the value of Power BI and that community and the how excited people were because you just rebranded the whole thing and you didn't bring those people along for the ride? Is my concern. That's why I wanted to lean into the question a little bit.
We're not going to change the podcast to Fabric.tips.
Right? So Power BI always.
It's out. It's out.
But I guess when you think about organizations and their adoption of new technologies, it's always way slower.
Yes.
Always. So you drew a hard line and I think there's a lot of confusion in the market going oh, wait. Where's this thing we probably just adopted or rolled out into our ecosystem and now it's Fabric? What are we supposed to do? so there's that. And then like over long term, does that mean you're not going to get the same sort of adoption or upswing in Fabric becoming the new thing within organizations? No, but like the lead time on that stuff is usually longer. So my 2 points, because now you have preview features on top of a production tool.
Yep.
Right. That is one of the most popular reporting and data tools out there.
Agree.
That's now part of preview, but not preview, but not part of it, but we're going to rename it. And then we're going to tell you where it's going, which is like Copilot, all these new features, which aren't part of the preview, aren't part of the tool yet, but we're telling you about them and we're demoing them. It's like, I'm excited, I'm confused, and where did my tool go? all at the same time.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yes, exactly right. I mean, yes, agreed. And I think this is the nature of Alex's question is, right, there's so much going on. Where do we focus our attention now? Right. What is going to drive the largest impact in my organization now? We got to figure that out.
Right. So in the question of, is it coming out too fast? I think all of those changes at the same time have created a lot of disruption and confusion in the market. That's all. But we'll forge away ahead through. Well, speaking of some of the documentation and how you want to use Fabric area, we can finally talk about our main topic today.
Well, I think this is a great transition because we're not going to pick apart Fabric even more because we used to have just a Power BI data mart as of 2 months ago, and now we have data warehouse and lakehouse already rolled into now the Fabric ecosystem. So kind of let's jump into today's topic. I guess this would be probably the most appropriate thing to kind of get into next. We're starting to talk about another article that we're going to really put in the chat window here. It's talking about another decision guide for Fabric, the Microsoft Fabric Decision Guide, the data warehouse or lakehouse, which is funny. The title only says warehouse or lakehouse, yet in the article, it actually talks about the Power BI data mart as well. So we're not deciding on the data mart. We're just only deciding between the lakehouse and the data warehouse. So already out of the gate, I'm a little bit confused by this article just by beginning here. So I'll put the article link in the chat window as well. It's also in the link in the description below in the video. So let's jump into this one. So high level, the article goes through, here's an outline of the 3 different tools you can use. You can talk about a data warehouse, a lakehouse, and a Power BI data mart. And it goes through a series of features that each of those tools have or do not have. Things like, what's the data volume? What type of data can you use? The data is organized by, what kind of write operations can you use using T-SQL or Spark or some other, data flows. And then there are other features in here that I have no clue what it is. Well, I had to do Googling this morning, like multi-table transactions. Okay. And then, it talks about security things. And then it talks about how do you query across different items or elements inside the lake. And then it goes into what we did on our last article, which was talking through different scenarios. And it talks about personas. So we'll see how far we get through all this. We already had a really long intro anyways, and we're now just starting the article halfway in. So let's kind of start with reactions. What do you guys think about this new documentation around how to decide what to use?
Oh man, Seth, I'm going to let you go first.
Tommy's going to let you.
I've been talking a lot already. Yeah, I think there's, so what's interesting to me is like these to me are, in the context of Fabric, just interfaces to get into the same storage location, which is Delta Parquet, right? We're storing data in the same ways. To your one point, that is interesting that data warehouses support that lakehouses don't, which is the multi-table transactions. And somebody in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that relates to the ability of a warehouse to have commits on a particular process. So if I have to update, if I have a chain of sequential things that all have to succeed successfully in order for, final fact, dimension, whatever, to be created, if any one of those things fails, it'll unwind it, as opposed to Lakehouse, where I just have transactions and commits happening on tables all the time, like right away. I think it's good because traditional BI, right, uses data warehousing, whereas a lot of new architectures relate to having to deal with unstructured data. And to me, that's the big differentiator here. If you have flat tables, if you're coming from transactional systems, data warehouses make sense. It's all in SQL. Why complicate things or throw in Lakehouse unless you need to do additional types of like data transformation and or machine learning, on top of data sets that you just can't do in the warehouse itself, right? So having these back and forth, and I think this has been demoed really well, makes the most sense to me, because we're in the enterprise space with both of those two different tools. And Tommy's a data mart guy, so I'll let him talk about through all this stuff. But incorporating that into this, I guess, would be the the business person aspect of storing data and like sorting things out. But yeah, I don't know. Like this one makes more sense to me, from where to put things in a kind of easy data marts, intermediate data warehouse, and harder or more complex Lakehouse, just because you can use multiple different languages and there's multiple different use cases and unstructured data in that ecosystem.
You think this one makes more sense than the data ingestion one?
Yeah, to me, and maybe that's just because I'm familiar with all
Well, maybe it's also because we're automatically eliminating one of the scenarios right off the bat too. Few things with this, and I was really just trying to dive into at least the roles here. The biggest thing that makes it a little easier is the roles are more defined in this scenario.
I would agree. The scenarios I feel like are a lot more realistic in this one than they were in the other one. It felt a bit more contrived in the prior article.
Or they used the same wording or the same persona. They didn't really explain, okay, where do they primarily focus? It's like, okay, I've done things in pipeline, so I'm a data engineer. Well, not necessarily. This one's a lot more defined. And I think let's talk about the elephant in the room, and it's the data marked one here. I know they're really trying to push the product here.
Are they?
Guys, they've added in a Fabric documentation.
I mean, you have to because it's part of it. But I would argue, so looking at the feature richness of all the three items, right? You have this idea of like a data warehouse, you have this idea of the lakehouse, and you have the Power BI Data Mart. If you look down line by line, warehouse and lakehouse are almost the exact same feature set. There's very few differences. And I'd even argue, I debate some of their arguments here. So the primary developer skill set in a data warehouse, yes, is a SQL. The primary data skill set in a lakehouse, they say it's Spark, but I would emphasize they're not emphasizing enough the Spark SQL interface, which I know, Seth, you're a SQL developer. And when you started looking at Spark, I mean, was it a really hard transition for you to go from a straight SQL developer to now a Spark SQL developer?
No,
I mean,
no, not at all. So, I mean, conceptually, like the biggest difference is just understanding the back ends of what you're interfacing with. That is like the gotcha part. But if you know SQL, and that's the other part of Lakehouse, is you absolutely can do all of the things you would need to using Spark SQL. Is there like slight differences? Sure.
Yep. And so when I look down here, I'm going, okay, well, there's really no downside of just moving over to a lakehouse with maybe a slight skill set difference. The skill set that I feel like you would continue to have in the data warehouse would be anything around store procedures, right? That's the only thing that you would get that would be different than what I would see in the lakehouse. And there's this really weird feature of multi-table transactions that they're really pushing on here for whatever reason. There must be something with that I've never used it, never even really heard of it. So is that going to be a major deciding factor between my data warehouse and my lakehouse? I'm not sure. The other part of this I would look at is what's the cost of these things?
Yeah.
So a data warehouse, I would think would be, from my experience, a data warehouse is always more expensive than a lakehouse build. And the amount of data you're pushing through, and even though it says unlimited amounts of data, you're going to pay for more of that unlimited amounts of data, I think, per gigabyte in a warehouse than you would in a lakehouse.
Which is interesting. So, like, let's talk through that, because we're obviously talking about Azure Synapse, right?
Sure.
As the underpinning of the warehouse. you've implemented more warehouse solutions than I have. I mean, when I'm looking at Lakehouse, I pay literally nothing for storage.
Yep.
A whole lot for compute.
Correct.
And
which is variable based on how well you design your system, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And can be tweaked, right? Like
correct,
performance tuned and fine tuned and all that. I will say getting there is a challenge, but at the same time in Fabric, how like, do you have that fine grain tooling or understanding of like when you're doing things way off the rails? And I guess that that opens up another thing, because our first solutions in building lake houses were extremely expensive. And it's only after refinement that you understand that ecosystem better to like not spend so much. How do you curb that in this, in a software as a service?
Yep.
Right.
And
so
also,
that would be a challenge, right?
Yes, I would agree.
Processing things and storage.
But to your point, I'm going to go into your point there a bit more, right? It's certain workloads. Like I wouldn't say all workloads you were doing was expensive. It was certain workloads that were identified as expensive because they were doing very chatty things between the lake and, it needed a lot of data. So instead of doing a select star all kind of thing, right, you had to okay, let's only pick the least amount of data. Let's be a bit smarter about only handling the data that needs to be changed as opposed to just reading an entire table and writing it back down again, right? So my thought here is how you design the systems are important. The monitoring of what workloads are being done in that system will become increasingly important with this shared service. Now it's a platform as a service now, and I need to, across my organization, identify where are things being used inappropriately. And I don't know if we're going to get that reporting right away.
One of the open questions I have with this, is depending on what you're using for data warehouse or lakehouse, is the power behind it, is the CPU different? Is the capacity different? Or is it just auto figuring out? Like if I think about Databricks, right, there's a whole slew of different types of clusters you can use depending on your data workload.
Yep.
And those are wide and varied. And depending on the workload or how you selecting one is already a cost savings.
Correct.
Is this auto figuring out for me which cluster it should be using? Or are we just picking the D series where it's just like, yep, it's the generalized workload and you're paying a little higher because we can't tell you what sort of workload you're using?
So that's a great question. And I don't think there's an easy answer to this one, but from what I gather right now, in the workspace settings of a workspace, you have the data science and data engineering, and there's an entire section where you're able to pick what kind of Spark compute you want.
Okay. So you do select your Spark compute.
And you can make a pool, like there's a pool that you can use. And again, this is where I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what's going on here. So if you think about what you would do in Databricks, right, you can have a single notebook run on a very specific cluster because you can say this notebook runs on this cluster. In Fabric, it sounds like the entire workspace gets a type of cluster. Yeah. So you're not able to really pick if you think about your workspace, in your workspace, you may have different loading or data engineering activities that would require a different type of cluster or different types of clusters based on that one notebook, right? So getting very specific on a per notebook level, it looks like Microsoft has tried to make the cluster selection and sizing very simple to you. You basically pick small, medium, large. That's what you get. Those are your options you get to pick for the different Spark pools, and that's what you use. So I feel like they've removed some of the developer level controls away from the Spark engine, which will make it harder for us to manage, and you're just going to kind of get what you get, and hopefully it optimizes itself.
Or and this is where the further analysis and kind of digging into the workspaces part for me comes in. The confusing part for me was oh, hey, Power BI users, you guys are used to workspaces. This is what is used in Fabric, and it automatically equates in my head. Workspaces are for reports.
Yep.
And in this ecosystem, maybe that's not the case, right? Maybe I have engineering workspaces. Maybe I have a workspace that is data science and ML. And the only thing in reporting would be their own sort of reporting. But the engine, the artifacts we're creating, should be part of OneLake. And then it's just a matter of opening visibility to or permissioning to other workspaces that would be doing the reporting or putting some of the data models together. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
this hierarchy of how you segment teams and workloads in this ecosystem breaks the original concept of workspaces.
And this is the problem with all the, and I think part of the initial question that we had on the chat, where too many updates. Well, it's not just the updates. We've added so many more entities and not just tools, but in a sense, objects and an organization with the same level, like the same hierarchy that we're used to. So yeah, all of this is going to exist in a workspace. The domain's more security. It doesn't really group anything. It's more from a security point of view, what someone can see. But it's not like
we have just security, right? Because to Mike's point, if we're going to provision like a very large cluster in a workspace, that's not for business users, right? Like that's permissioning, that's locking down a resource on what the expenses they can use for certain workloads.
Yes. And so my thought here being, if there are, if I look at the entire workspace and I have, 90% of my workloads are small, quick wins, easy loading, small tables, no big deal, great. But when there's that 10% of workloads that are, I'm going to read this massive table, I'm going to write millions of records, I'm going to do a massive load or data engineering, or I'm going to run a data science project on that, that cluster needs to be designed kind of for what that use case is. So that you're now, now I'd have two workloads in the same workspace that may not align with how I want the cluster to run. So, I almost feel like inside the workspace, I should have the ability to be able to pick, here are 3 different types of clusters I would want to run, and then on a per notebook basis, attached to that cluster, execute what I want, and then move on. Or, be able to designate that cluster for those different, those elements. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how people actually find solutions to this, because there's probably a million different ways you can think about how to optimize and tune and rip out costs on this stuff. But
but at the same time, like the structures of those things should be in line with each of these familiar places for folks.
Sure.
And the nice thing about Fabric in general is, like, by combining all of this stuff together, Greg in chat outlined that these are like doors to the same storage mechanism. It's all going to the same place, right?
Yes, correct.
It's the familiarity for people that know data warehousing and SQL that you're bringing along for the ride. It's Lakehouse people that you're bringing along for the ride. For I think the significant difference is more for data mart and data warehouse people in the underlying storage. But for Lakehouse people, like that's exactly what we've been doing the whole time, right?
Correct.
So like there is no change.
Yes.
It's just bringing these other platforms into this ecosystem where it no longer matters, right?
Yes. I like that.
Here's your path of how you like to manage, manipulate, and create curated data sets. The interaction point with every reporting user is still going to be the Delta Parquet tables. It's permission on those artifacts that come out of these ecosystems that are the value to the company, right? So if you think about, like, it's almost like, I don't care which way you want to do all the data stuff. Here's all of it together in different ways in which you can do all of those features, functionality of tool sets that have existed previously. The end output, though, is what's uniquely different about all this with OneLake and Delta Parquet, because it's just a matter of visibility. Yes. Who has visibility into the object, and when do I use it? Yes. Which is game changing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So
if you manage it well.
Well, I wanted to kind of like, if you had your first choice of these 3 options based on what Microsoft describes in the article, first choice, second choice, third choice. If you're a developer today and you're looking at this world and trying to say, I don't know which one to pick, how do I, maybe aside from like, where am I comfortable right now? Because I think I'm under the assumption here that people are going to learn. Like, let's just assume that, whatever technology you pick here is a learned technology. You'll spend the time, you'll figure it out, you'll make it work. So how would you rank data warehouse, lakehouse, and then data mart? What would be your first choice of those 3, then your second choice and third choice?
For the vast majority of users and companies?
Yeah, so just kind of like general general design, right? You're coming into a company, you're going to try to recommend something aside from skills, right? So, I would argue that many of the Lakehouse design decisions or many of the Lakehouse concepts are very transferable to a SQL developer. They would feel comfortable there. They do need to learn some things, but it wouldn't be so bad that you're like, oh, I'm totally lost. But I'm assuming that, learning aside, based on the technology stack, the way it's at right now, which of these things would you choose first, second, and third? Tommy would definitely pick the data mart first. He would always
first. You can do everything
is in data mart.
Absolutely. Honestly, it's probably gonna. I feel like it's gonna be the standard answer, but data marts do not fit in this story. They fit as, I think, as intended to be a querying tool. We've not seen the updates. It doesn't do pretty much everything that a Lakehouse or the warehouse can do. So I think, honestly, just shove it aside. But I would probably go number one. Just the focus is on the Lakehouse now, and it's because of Microsoft integration. That's what works the best with Fabric. If I buy all in, so to speak, with Fabric, and basically put all the birds in one, whatever the saying is.
Hit two birds with one stone. Put all the eggs in a basket.
All the eggs in a basket.
Bet the farm.
Yeah. So I got birds.
Yeah, birds and eggs in a basket. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, if I'm going to put all my eggs in the Fabric basket, then I'm going to want to obviously go with the Lakehouse.
Seth, what's your second decision, Tommy?
I think if I'm still,
you're choosing now between Data Warehouse and Power BI Data Mart.
No, I'm still choosing between a Lakehouse and warehouse. I think if I'm just doing a few parts of integration with Fabric, not everything, the kids can boodle. I'm probably still going to go with the warehouse. It's what I know. It's what I'm familiar with. It's just because the Lakehouse plays best, and we don't know this yet, but how well does it play when there's other systems and other integrations that are outside of Fabric? Right now, everything's being that end-to-end solution.
Okay.
So I would probably still stay with the warehouse if I'm not going all in.
Seth, where do you think you fit on? So you're basically, Tom, you're saying Lakehouse, Data Warehouse, then Data Mart. That's kind of your order of precedence if you had to choose things. Seth, where would you land?
Yeah, before I answer that, like there has to be some, like the difference between these must be how like the CPU or the cores and how they're processing data. Because although Greggy B cracks us every single time we talk about data sizes, this is specifically the difference between that they're making in the documentation between the warehouse and the Lakehouse is data size. So if I'm going to be met with challenges in the data warehouse, even though I'm storing everything in Delta Parquet now, I'm a little confused with that. But that aside, right? I think the vast majority of companies are going to start with the data warehouse. Like, well, preface, I'm a Lakehouse guy. Everything we do is in Lakehouse, but I also have massive volumes of data, and I love the ecosystem. Do I think the majority of companies need to go there? No. I would say I'd revert it. I'd say data warehouse first and Lakehouse second, because the vast majority of companies don't have that large of size of data. And realistically, it's about shaping data to get the maximum amount of use of it in reporting tools and put business logic behind it, right? And if I'm already in flattened tables in SQL servers, why would I need a Lakehouse, right? Like, why do I need unless I'm going to incorporate certain data science and ML things, but that can be just its very separate thing in the Fabric ecosystem. It can just be this, hey, we're going to spool that up, because it's not like I have to move data into a Lakehouse, right? Where with other tooling right now, it's, well, we have to set it up and structure it, and it's in the Lakehouse now. And I have to keep pushing data around to different systems. If it's flat, most users are absolutely familiar with SQL interfaces. Like that's probably the place that, I'd say the vast majority of companies, price agnostic, I'm not talking about pricing right now, right? Mm-hmm. Tool sets and capabilities that would hit the widest audience are absolutely going to be in SQL and those sorts of user interfaces. Lakehouse changes the paradigm a little bit. You have to get familiar with Jupyter notebooks. You have to understand the clusters and how they operate against workloads. It's different from the objects you can create from transformational things within them. It's just more to learn, right? And if there's not a need from a data size perspective, or you're doing, advanced data science type things, then I like a lot of this ecosystem removes some of the benefits that we would have argued were part of a lakehouse because of how it's stored in Delta Parquet in OneLake.
So based on this diagram that Microsoft provided, I would be in the camp of Tommy. I would choose Lakehouse, Data Warehouse, and Data Mart.
What diagram?
The table that Microsoft provides in the article. So above that table that they provide, I would definitely, from the features they list out there, I would definitely pick Lakehouse over Data Warehouse. The only thing I can see that would be an advantage for the Data Warehouse potential is this kind of object level security, table view, store procedures. If your company already feels like you need to run, and I'd also argue, my opinion here too, is most companies need to get away from store procedures. It's just an old thing that you can use if you're comfortable with it. You've built a lot of them, fine. But I think the world is moving away from those elements, and the fact that the warehouse is still writing Delta tables down to the lake and can read things from those Delta tables just gives me one more reason to move over to Lakehouse pieces. The only thing I could
what's the justification behind that though?
Like just saying
store procedures aren't like the equivalent is what?
I just don't like them. I don't like building them. I mean, they work. But I would rather have a pipeline execute things like a store procedure, right? So I feel like the pipelines activities does that orchestration, and to what I would argue a higher, more capable degree, right? So, I mean, when I look at store procedures, it's doing a specific set of things to a pieces of data, but it kind of only local to that SQL server. Yes, you could call a store procedure to run some other process or notify someone outside of the ecosystem of that SQL server. But when I really think about what I want to do capability-wise, that's pipelines.
Sure, but in this ecosystem, that doesn't apply, because if I have access to the underlying data set, which is a Delta Parquet file, if that gets created in Lakehouse, I can manipulate that through the warehouse. I can manipulate that through a store procedure. And that's why I'm saying it changes the dichotomy, because we're not talking about being locked into a single SQL server anymore. You're talking about an ecosystem, and the storage and those artifacts are the same regardless of which door you open. And that's why it changes for me.
I could see that. I mean, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm just saying I wouldn't choose that direction.
You can.
Well, we're just going to disagree on this one, because I really feel like the Lakehouse adds more flexibility and capability long term, and I think it's also more effective. So the fact that Microsoft is pushing many of their tools already towards this Delta lake of elements.
I agree. And I think it's cost agnostic.
Yeah, I know. And I also, kind of was making the note here about, learning agnostic, right? If we just said we're going to learn it, we're going to do it, move forward with it. I mean, I think the future of technology is going to be sitting around that Lakehouse more. I think there's going to be more features and things that are coming to the Lakehouse that are going to make it easier for users. The linchpin, or the really big deciding factor for me is, in the Lakehouse, really, the more they abstract that away from the business user, the more they can make that easier for a citizen developer to use and execute on top of, the easier it will become to adopt a Lakehouse. And so I think the barrier to entry for a citizen developer who maybe was playing with data marts initially, working with a data flow, moving some tables around, trying to make a table, I think that user, that citizen developer, will feel more comfortable inside a Lakehouse. Well, again, talking about like that grow up story, what does that graduation story look like inside an organization? You're comfortable in data flows, you'll be more comfortable in the Lakehouse architecture and structures than you would be in a SQL server.
Yeah, but that's ETL. That's not Lakehouse. You're talking about pipeline activities, data flow, Gen 2.
But doesn't Data Warehouse already incorporate pipeline activities with store procedures? That would be equivalent of running a store procedure is equivalent to running.
I suppose
orchestration of data.
You would have notebooks in the Lakehouse that you'd be executing through those pipelines.
Correct. That's what I'm thinking.
To me, dude, I think it's splitting hairs saying like store procedures make less sense than me creating a notebook that modifies data. I agree with you. Like I said, I preface you. I like Lakehouse. I would recommend Lakehouse, but I think the vast majority of people are going to be much more comfortable in data warehouse in that land because it's very SQL specific. However, if you're going to say it's going to cost me 2x than the Lakehouse, then yeah, go to the Lakehouse.
Like, exactly. The cost makes a big decision on that part.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that one. All right. With that, we've burned through a perfectly good hour. We've been arguing a heated discussion around this. And we didn't even, again, like always, we didn't even get to the scenarios or the different users here. Susan, Rob, and Ash as a citizen developer, a data engineer, and a professional developer. Maybe we'll save that conversation for a future statement there. So I feel like I've hit a chord with some of the SQL developers in our crowd around store procedures. So I just don't like using them. I want to move to other stuff. So, sorry, it's my personal preference.
I could have laid into you more.
You would have. I know you would have. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I hope you found some value from this one. I hope this helps you think a little bit more around the different integrations between data warehouse. I think we are right there in the same boat with everyone else. We're trying to figure out how Fabric will impact our normal workflows. What will this mean for us moving forward? And how will Fabric kind of influence or impact what we build moving forward? So just some great thoughts today. We appreciate all the comments in the chat. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your comments and your thoughts as well. Thank you for contributing to the conversation additionally. With that, our only ask is, can you please just share the podcast with somebody else? If you found this to be valuable, if this made you really confused about why store procedures and why not Lakehouse and whatever, feel free to share this to other people. Let them be confused too with you, and we can all figure this out together. And yeah, exactly. Mark says, my head hurts even more. Have a great day. You're welcome, Mark. I'm happy to give you an early morning headache before you start your day. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere it's available: Google, Apple, Spotify. Make sure to check us out. If you want us to talk about a particular thing with Fabric, make sure to go to powerbi.tips/the podcast. Leave us a message. We do look at those. And
let's be honest, Tommy looks at them.
I actually have a report that I look at that. So yeah. Just to see. So I'm hoping to get the numbers up a little more. But anyways, surprise me. So so then I can actually put an automation system because I haven't needed to.
Well, just make sure you stick it in the Lakehouse and don't use a store procedure. We'll be happy.
I could stick in the Lakehouse. I'm going to stick in a data mart.
Oh no! Don't do that, Tommy. That's the worst.
Well, I mean, it is the third option.
It is the third option. So. Maybe you can do it, and you can just tell it. You can do it, Tommy, and then tell us how bad it is, and then we can figure it out later on what we don't like about it.
Rather, how not does it anything?
It doesn't do anything.
And join us live too. So goodness is great.
All right, we're gonna end it there. We're done.
Boom.
Well, that's the end of the podcast.
Emoji.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much. We'll catch you later.